So, some interesting halakhot as they pertain to Hannukah, specifically here in New York City, because at the end of the day, it's always part of the joys and challenges of being Jewish and observant and maintaining the identity that you fought so hard to preserve, are adapting to the times in one way or another. So, the biggest and juiciest of the controversies around the halachic controversies in Hannukah are the most appropriate time to light the candles. Happens to be, it's a big debate. The Gemara classically uses a unique expression that's used nowhere else in the Talmud. Whenever you find such a thing, you have to ask yourself why this is the case and what else they were trying to teach us aside from a technical window of time. I'll give you an example of this. The time period at which, the time from which and on you're permitted in the morning to put on talit and to read Kirat Shema is referred to as Mishiyakir. And what's Mishiyakir? Really, the full expression Mishiyakir is Haviro. The time at which you can recognize a friend, literally. You can recognize a friend. So how close do you have to be to a friend in order to recognize? How much light do you need in the background to recognize a friend? But what does Shema have to do with recognizing friends? And at the end of the day, we agree that it's pretty much dawn, at the crack of dawn. So couldn't Chazal have said the crack of dawn if that's what they wanted to? They said it 800 million times everywhere else in the Talmud. This one particular time, they were at a loss for words. Like they were out of letters in Scrabble, they had to use other ones. So here's a beautiful little follow-up on this. The Arizal talks about the importance of reciting a short prayer before the prayer. So there are prayers before we pray. So you have to pray that your prayer should be appropriate and properly directed. And what's this prayer? If you look in most Sephardi Sidurim, they have it printed at the beginning. הריני מקבל עליי מצוות העשה של ואהבת לרעך כמוך. והריני אוהב כל אחד בני ישראל כנפשי ומולי ואני מקפיד את כל לפנים ברואים מלך מלכים מלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. I hereby accept upon myself the mitzvah of ואהבת לרעך כמוך. The mitzvah of loving my peer, my fellow Jew, like I love myself. Because it's important to love yourself before tefillah. If you don't love yourself and believe in yourself, then why would you expect anyone else to? Job interviews, resumes, you've heard this in the physical world, so it's true in the spiritual too. You have to love yourself. There are good things about you. So you have to express this love that you have for all of Am Yisrael before you can begin praying in the morning. How could you pray in the morning without expressing your love for all of Am Yisrael? It doesn't make sense. It defies logic. So the Arizal explains how all of our neshamot are connected and related, and the more neshamot I can connect to and relate to before I begin my tefillah, the more I can uplift a little bit, the more I can energize with my tefillah, the more I can actually draw from the non-physical world into the physical world by way of the vehicle, right, the conduit for communication between the two worlds, which are neshamot. And therefore, he underscores the importance, like this is the most important prayer of the day, is actually a daily declaration that I love all other Jews and that I want my neshama to be bound with theirs, and to direct my tefillah as such. So he makes no mention of this. He can leave this for you to figure out for yourself. But anyone who's been through the Talmud, it's like the first 3 pages of it, Masechet Brachot, it begins this way. And it says, when can you start reading Shema? From the time at which you can recognize, you can see, at least from a certain distance, and recognize someone as your friend, right? Then what happens if I see someone I don't like? I can't read Shema until I find someone I do. What if I don't like anybody? Just one of those people. I live in New York City. Is there anyone really worthy of being a friend of mine? So if this is your attitude, then it doesn't really matter what time you pray. It doesn't really matter who you pray to. You're praying to yourself, effectively. You're the deity in question, and that's a separate halachic category. But very clever. Sometimes Chazal find very deep ways to deliver very powerful messages. They just don't do it in such a direct and frontal way. It helps to confuse people who like to be confused. So the story of Hannukah is like this. We have a time period during which the candles need to be lit. At what time do we light the candles? So the expression in the Gemara, as you light the candles, so they should be lit by the time עד שתכלה רגל מן השוק. You light your candles such that they should be lit from the time that after the sun sets until the last like an Arab, the end over finished. So until the last feet have left the shuk. So back in the day, people worked in the shuk. Today let's not make too many comparisons to today. There's some very important differences, but assuming you work in one market or another, the last people the Rambam says, last people coming home. In other words, if your mitzvah in lighting the candles is to publicize the miracle, how do you publicize the miracle? There has to be a public to whom you make things publicly known. That's the definition of publicize, is make it publicly aware, publicly known, publicly evident that there's a miracle that you're commemorating. So how do you do this? You do this by lighting a candle while there's still people coming home from work. What time do people come home from work in New York City? I'm not asking anyone here, neither the men nor the women. Some husbands come home on time for mincha, some for arvit, some for shachrit, some for tikkun chatzot. So what determines when a man comes home from work today, as opposed to antiquity when people didn't work hard and life was easy? Today we come home when? Like when you had to go find water to bring home so you have what to drink and how to wash yourself and your clothing. So back then life was easy and very convenient. Today it's hard. Today we have cars, we have trains, we have smartphones, and so we stay at work until we can't work anymore. We work until the neshama is basically about to call it quits. It goes on strike, at which point I've got 3, maybe 4 minutes of patience left for my wife. Come home, we'll talk a little bit, and I'm going to sleep. And that's it. And maybe not so many minutes of patience for my wife. We'll talk about that some other time. So what's the point of Hannukah? What's the point of the... So halakhically, technically speaking, because there's always depth to halakha, but the simple halachic question, am I successfully publicizing the miracle of Hannukah if I light the candles after, let's say, half an hour from the time the stars come out? Ask you the question a little bit differently. Will anyone in New York City see your candles if you light them before 8, 9, or 10 o'clock? There's no one outside. They're in cabs or in trains, or they're actually still at work. Maybe I should light the candles at work and not fulfill the obligation, but no. Chachamim said, it's nira ishu beito. You can't fulfill the obligation unless you're lighting the candle in your home, where you, even if you spend most of your day, and maybe even some of your nights at work, technically, where you have your mail sent is probably where you reside. And the mitzvah is to light the candle there. Talk about that in a second too. So you light the candle at home. I have this window of approximately half an hour, according to the Rambam, from the time the stars come out till it gets completely dark. No one's walking around outside at night, and therefore I wouldn't fulfill my obligation. The Shulchan Aruch takes the Rambam at his word. He takes him literally. Why? Because he also lived in a time without electricity. Torches cost money to burn, kerosene, petroleum, whatever it was that you were, and they were dangerous. So he holds this way. The rest of the Rishonim do not. The rest of the Rishonim holds that it's lichat achila. This is the ideal way to observe the mitzvah, is by lighting the candles at the rush hour, at the peak traffic time. How many people can I catch on the street? They will start to leave work. They won't leave any earlier than they have to, because everyone loves work and everyone loves money, which is really what Hanukkah is all about. I know we're on camera. I can't help myself. Listening to a radio broadcast, I think this was last year. Someone was fighting about the non-Jewish holidays, and I listen with one ear, and it's philosophy, it's theology, it's modernity. How do people relate to spirituality? And so a few Christians that were very upset about the nature of the Christian holiday, especially here in America, because boy, oh boy, do Americans merchandise things. I mean, so what's left of the holidays is, what are you buying me? What am I going to? Do I use it? What'd you buy for me last year? I remember what she got me, and I'm going to give her gift to some other gift. So someone comes out with the following statement. It was Santa Claus who killed Jesus.
Oh,
Like this concept of everyone getting gifts and everyone, we're all socialists come Christmas. Someone's going to give me something. I have it coming to me. I'm owed a certain amount of gifts and gratuities and coupons and gift cards. What's the expression was that? It's like this deity of gift giving and obligations and finding deals and spending like 2 months shopping for physical material things. It's basically the end of spirituality. I thought it was poignant and it was cleverly put. So, anyway, so the question was like this. In antiquity, people worked as long as you could work without having to pay for the light, so they stayed out late, and they came home as the stars were coming out. And so the majority of the Rishonim, save for the Rambam, he holds this is the only time at which the candles can be lit. You light after this, you light without a bracha. It's nice, you publicize something, but you didn't get it right. That wasn't the mitzvah, the way the Gemara describes it, which is once the last man or woman has left the shuk, you no longer fulfilled the mitzvah, and you can light symbolically, not halachically. Yeah.
So I'm not sure I understand. Why do we ask ourselves this question specifically about this? So we usually tend not to try to make things depending on the modernity and how things change nowadays. So in many other examples, we have things that are rooted on how things used to be, and we don't want to update them now. And in this case, I mean, I understand that this is maybe not Midoraita, so you have a little more flexibility, but still, it's something that, it was specifically because market time was there, so you keep doing the same thing that you used to do, even if market time today is different. Monday and Thursday. You read Torah Monday and Thursday because I was used to do the market days. Today are non-market days, but you still read Torah Monday and Thursday. So
right.
Why don't we? How do we decide what to update and what we don't?
Very, very good question. So there's another few points we can make about rabbinic concepts. Number one is that rabbinic concepts are not Kabbalah, meaning they all have a logic to them. If the Torah says I can't eat milk and meat, it doesn't matter what theory I contrive, how I arrived at this conclusion, milk and meat is good for you, it's bad for you, it's this kind of milk or that kind of meat, it doesn't matter. The Torah said don't do it. You can expound upon it, you can compare and contrast with other mitzvot, but you will never come to the conclusion that I understand the mitzvah so fully and so well, I know why the mitzvah was given, and therefore I can call into question the validity of it. We don't question the validity of rabbinic decrees, so to speak, but they all have a logic to them. There is no such thing as a rabbinic decree that we don't understand, it's just what they said and that's it. There's always a reason for it. Chazal never decreed anything without giving an explanation. They owe us an explanation when they decree something. You might not believe the explanation to be as relevant or as compelling in our generation as it was in antiquity, the second day of Yom Tov, which is everyone's favorite. Right, the second day of Yom Tov.
I didn't use it on purpose because I know.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did. Don't. So the second day, the second day of Yom Tov. What's the chidush? So they didn't know how to make the calendar was already done. They had prescribed the Jewish calendar for 7,000 years. I mean, it's like they didn't know that you didn't need to do this second day if you calculated the months right. They wanted it to be this way. It could be that it was a form of penalty or a fine on those living in Chutz La'aretz. Really, we're supposed to be going to Israel at least for the Chagim, if not, to live there the entire year. So it's not that they didn't know. Maybe you'll say today, but it could be back then you were living in a community where people lost track, or they didn't see they used to have smoke signals and they stopped with this because there were other sects that were confusing them. But today I have a Google Calendar, or I have myzmanim.com, or I have whatever other app. So that doesn't mean that the decree itself should be undone or overturned. There was a logic to it, and so sometimes we'll just have to content ourselves with, the decree is what it is. But there's always a rationale, there's always a reason.
You can't call it a penalty though, because if the second day is a penalty, then the first day is a penalty.
Well, the first day is biblically ordained.
You can't call a second day of holiday a penalty.
In the sense that
I know what you mean.
yeah, it's difficult for us to observe it, especially when it comes out one of these 2 days of Yom Tov plus Shabbat.
I understand all that, but
So Chazal, maybe if it stemmed from an earlier time where there was a certain degree of doubt or ambiguity, when's the month declared, was there something during in effect or not? Because they used to say it was a big party. Rosh Chodesh used to be a really big deal. We should talk about that. It's not a big deal today. It was a huge deal, a very big deal. And they didn't overturn the edict of prior generations, even in the time period where they potentially might have been able to. They didn't. They left it on the books. And that's the part that leaves you wondering. So if it was just superfluous, totally unnecessary, so they could at some point have come together, banded together and said, well, we have a big din of a certain stature, a certain number, and of a certain degree of learning, and we could maybe overturn this, but they never even made such an effort. So maybe they refused to undo it, or they refused to overturn it, because they saw more than one reason to it, or there were enough compelling reasons to leave it as it was. It's a reward for people living in Chutz La'aretz to Judaism Yom Tov. I mean, it's nice to maybe distance them from work. You have a lot of these conflicts between work and materialism and Chutz La'aretz, and then moving to Israel and smaller apartments and less cars and more expensive basic necessities. So there's something to diminishing the amount of work that you do and not having to do with redemption, or maybe just contenting yourself with less and finding more productive things to do with your time. Hard to say. A little bit of it is going to be conjecture, but the reality is that every single rabbinic decree has a rationale to it. The rationale is going to be either to safeguard something rabbinic, something biblical. So why do we have the concept of muqtzeh on Shabbat? Something's muqtzeh literally means it's set aside, it's cast away over the course of Shabbat. Because they didn't want you to use things that only have a forbidden use, right? So if Chazal were alive today, the telephone would be muqtzeh during the week too, but they at least don't use it on Shabbat. Why? Because there's nothing Shabbat related or Shabbat oriented that you will benefit from by picking up your cell phone on Shabbat. Don't even turn it over, don't even look at it. You have that LED thing flashing, just leave it, forget it. It's Shabbat. It wouldn't be Shabbat if you... So there's nothing biblically wrong with touching things that I'm not allowed to use on Shabbat, but they're safeguarding the Shabbat. So we suggest, as the Chachamim, as the sages, our advice is, it wasn't universally accepted when it first came out. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai didn't hold from it. Rabbi Yehuda did, and he said, no, muqtzeh. It's something that can only serve for not Shabbat related or antithetical, concepts that are antithetical to Shabbat. Don't even pick it up. Don't even touch it, don't move it. You can move it under certain circumstances. You need the space. You can push it in a bizarre way. But the idea is, don't get used to handling things you shouldn't be touching. So in the context of Shabbat, they wanted to preserve the Shabbat. Don't blow the shofar on Shabbat, even if it's Rosh Hashanah, because you'll end up violating Shabbat to carry the shofar, and in order to observe a mitzvah that is biblical in nature. That's a pretty big deal, by the way. But because preserving the Shabbat is more important, they even canceled mitzvot. And today you would say that's silly. Who doesn't know you can't carry on Shabbat? Well, still, probably 90% of Jews don't know that you shouldn't be carrying on Shabbat. Eruv, no Eruv, whatever. But the decree wasn't undone because to a greater or lesser extent, the same suspicion exists. So we have a whole bunch of rabbinic decrees. Either they're there because they protect us from making biblical mistakes, or in some cases they're there for very particular, very explicit reasons. There's a rationale to them. Purim, technically, is a rabbinic decree. Did I do anything biblical? Could I be punished for not observing Purim? I mean, is there a sacrifice I was supposed to bring that I didn't? This is my classic proof, by the way, of Yetzer Hara just everywhere. Every year, I go out of my way to invite professional alcoholics to my Purim table. I say, you drink all year long. Today, it's a mitzvah. And they all check in for rehab on Purim. It's the one day of the year they don't feel like drinking. It's alcohol. I don't feel like drinking, whatever. Gotta be bigger things out there. Like, no, come on, drink today. Rehab tomorrow. We'll have a great time. We'll enjoy ourselves. We can let our hair down. Whatever. There's a mitzvah. Like it's less enticing. It's less tasty to them. So what did I do? I didn't observe Purim. Nothing biblically wrong with that. But you're missing out on a rabbinic concept, which probably stems from some biblical concept of gratitude to Hashem, of recognizing and commemorating miracles and being thankful for what you have, acknowledging supernatural victories over our enemies. So Chazal instituted this, but for a very specific, explicit reason. When it comes to Hannukah, there has to be a reason. So even if the reason only applied then, true, we might not necessarily undo it. But the original decree, the original edict, the original framework has to have a rationale to it. So our question is going to be, what's the rationale? Why do I say this? Because the Gemara itself says about the Gemara, "Aghrad ishma'ata sebra." The reward you get for learning Torah is studying the reasons and the rationale behind these different mitzvot. Why? Because then you can apply them to any situation. If I know that there is such a concept as being strict where things might be biblical, or being lenient where something's rabbinic, I don't even need to know the details of the case to tell you what are you concerned about. If it's milk and meat, it's biblical. If it's Terumot u'Maasrot in this day and age, or the Shemitah, it's midrabanan. It's certain ground rules you can figure out. So why would Chazal insist? So the fact that Hanukkah should be commemorated, fine. Everyone commemorates it the way they want to. Nope, there's a uniform standard way to commemorate Hanukkah. It has to do with lighting the candles, and the candles, there's a time associated with them. Why would the Gemara say this if it weren't relevant to the commemoration? So according to the Rambam, what do you mean? Your goal is to publicize the miracle. That the Gemara says, Pirsumei Nisan. My goal is to publicize the miracle. Halakhot of Hannukah. You light the candles at the time we're going to catch the greatest number of people. Because if that's the logic, I could probably do a study and figure out that people walk down my block between the hours of 6 and 8 p.m., regardless of when the sun rises or the sun sets. And if that's my goal, maybe I'll light in the window that faces the busiest sidewalk if I have more than one. Or the idea is to catch a certain number of people in transit. They should see this on their way home. They should remind themselves to light the candles themselves. Who knows? But according to the majority of the Rishonim, it's not an embellishment. It's just the ideal way for the mitzvah to be observed. You didn't manage to light at this particular time. Light it another time. The Shulchan Aruch says, you know what? This is the ideal time to light the Hanukkah candles. And in fact, if my wife happens to be home and I happen to be out at work, since the obligation, as far as the Sephardim hold, the obligation is on the household, better my wife should light the candles in my absence than wait for me, and that she should light them in my presence. At least according to the Rambam. But the Shulchan Aruch says, even though everyone else is against him on this, they all ganged up on him, be in deference to the Rambam, everyone acknowledges this is, you fulfill your obligation by letting them. The question is only what happens afterwards. We all hold b'di'avad, a little bit less ideally, you can light throughout the entire night until the dawn, basically, as long as the candles can be identified and noticed, you can fulfill the obligations. So, a couple of quick questions that will hold you up too long. One of them is, why do we light at home? And if you're probably sure to catch more people at school or at work or wherever it is that you are. So one of the answers given for this is that among the decrees that the Greeks or the Hellenist Jews conspired against the Torah observant Jews at the time was against the mikveh. This is written. It's in the Midrashim. That they made a specific decree that they were against this whole concept of marital purity. Nope. They wanted so Yus Permanopte, Rex Permanopte, the right or the law of the first night. Jewish woman gets married, she has to spend her first night with the Greek governor at the time, which basically means she can't marry a Kohen, and there are no more Kohanim, and we eradicated them in one generation. And there was a gzerah made against Jewish women using the mikveh because it was to them superstitious, spiritual concept, no physical reason why this would be necessary. And since the whole, this culture and these edicts were an affront, an attack on the Jewish home, the most appropriate place for us to commemorate the miracle was at home. But to their credit, it was really thanks to the women that the revolution began. So maybe the traditional association with the woman being at home, the candles should be lit at home during Hanukkah. In fact, there's a custom brought down by the Shulchan Aruch that women didn't do melacha during the 30 minutes, that the obligation is to light the Hanukkah candles, they should be lit for 30 minutes. And there's a custom that women don't do melacha during 30 minutes, or at least the first 30 minutes that the candles are actually lit. They get time off for good behavior, they get an exemption for having participated in the nis. However you'd like to view it. So what's the idea about Shetichna Regel Min Hashul? What does Hanukkah have to do with work? The Gemara says that the Greeks used to make fun of the Jews for not working on Shabbat. To them, that was lazy. You have 7 days in the week, you can work, you want to rest, you rest at night, you wake up, you be productive like everybody else. To them, the Jews were lazy people. Don't like to work on Shabbat, we take it easy, we pray a little bit later, we have a late breakfast, a late lunch, spend the whole day eating and drinking, and none of you know what I'm talking about. And then at the end of the day, we have Seudah Arviyit, just Malavei Malka. It's a 25, 26 hour long party. And to the Greeks, this was laziness. This was laziness. How could you not be productive on one of, just like any other day of the week? They were opposed to the concept of us planning our calendar around Shabbat and Rosh Chodesh. So one of the famous decrees was a decree against Brit Milah also. But against Rosh Chodesh, who needs the lunar calendar when we have the solar calendar? What's the big deal with Rosh Chodesh? It happens, it's less consistent than the solar calendar. It needs to be caught up. We have leap years every so often to keep them on par. And Shabbat was particularly offensive to them. So since Shabbat is such it's one of the 10 Commandments, it's such a central focus of Torah observant Judaism, the Greek culture that was, believe it or not, obsessed with work and with material productivity, but wasn't really respectful or appreciative of non-physical productivity, didn't really hold much from it. So could be that Chazal were trying to imply, God forbid, but brace yourselves, that maybe we should come home from work at an almost half-decent hour during the 8 days of Hannukah in order to light the candles early. I mean, it's almost an excuse to leave the office. And the obsession, our obsessive-compulsive disorder with staying at work until we can't read the computer screen anymore is maybe not such a Jewish concept. Maybe there is something a little bit Hellenistic about it. It's money, it's strength, it's power, it's influence. They're all great things, but maybe curtailing some of our parnasa-related activities wouldn't be the end of the world. Could be that's what Chazal were saying. So in antiquity, look, people worked because they had no choice. That's how you made a living. If you didn't work, you didn't eat. But even then, it was right at the end of the work day, you should light your candles in order to make sure that people see it. You come home, while the candles are noticeable. Maybe they were lighting before it was totally dark out, which would be strange were it not for the fact that I know you're lighting to commemorate a miracle. So you're not just turning on the lights for the sake of convenience. They're not even totally necessary at that point. If you see candles in my window, I'm lighting them not because I need them, I'm lighting them because I want to publicize a miracle. So it might have made more sense in antiquity. In that context, there's still some logic behind trying to light early in this context too. I know that all the schools give off, by the way, just so you know. All of the elementary and high schools let out early on the 8 days of Hannukah so that the kids can light with their parents, some of the fathers care, and come home early enough. They can light at what ends up being something like 4:30 or quarter to 5. So although not necessarily necessary for all the same reasons, I think there's definitely a point to it. Nice to hold by the Rambam and fulfill all the opinions as opposed to relying on the lenient approach that you can light the entire night, which is true, you'll catch people in the street, but maybe it's more about you and your work and the amount of time that you spend there, and a little bit less about lighting at what is or isn't the most ideal time. So maybe we'll let out a little bit early too, let everybody breathe a little bit and digest some of this material. Yeah, right here.
Yeah.